The idea of this talk is it's very lighthearted, hopefully a little bit humorous, just kind of examining some documentation from the real world, as I like to put it. Some things that I found and thought were interesting or thought-provoking, worth thinking about. But if you're not feeling it, feel free to mosey on. So I am Mike Hand. I'm a senior software developer at HMB. We're down in Columbus. Technically, our office is in Westerville. Currently, I'm working downtown for one of our clients. We're a consulting company. We have a booth here, so feel free to come by and chat with us. So, excuse me. Let's get started with something pretty familiar, kind of just get our feet wet. Google Maps on mobile, okay? So directions are documentation, right, on how to physically get from point A to point B. And certainly, this is additional information, and I'll zoom in a little bit there. But you can see Google Maps offered me at this point in time a lovely little 16-minute detour. So that was something that I didn't know about, an alternate route that I could take. But it's not very useful. And actually, this is almost explicitly undesirable, right? I could take this route, but there's no information on any reason why I should. And if there is a reason, it's not given. Maybe there's a scenic detour. Maybe there's some business there that I frequent that Google thinks that I might want to go to. But if that's the case, it hasn't been indicated why. All that I've been told is, hey, you could do this. Also, it's going to add 16 minutes to your time, right? Additionally, if we go back up to the top, if you look at the clock, it's 0741, right? Not 741, 0741. So I usually have my phone set to 24-hour time. So we know that this is 7:41 in the morning, right? So the odds are pretty good, right? 5 days out of the week, I'm probably on my way to work, right? So do I want to stop on my way to work to take a 16-minute detour and make myself late? Probably not. So in this case, Google Maps failed me, right? So let's look at another one. This one's a little bit better. In this case, the driver, me, is shown that there's some traffic ahead. Okay, let's zoom in a little bit there. And there's an alternate route that may not be as obvious, and because of the traffic ahead, I guess you could take your chance on it. It says it's supposed to take about the same amount of time, right? So maybe you want to do it, maybe you don't. It's certainly longer. If you care about wasting gas, you probably don't want to do it. But at the least, it's offering me another route that's equivalent so that I have another option. All right, one more here, just to kind of seal the point home. This one is actually helpful, okay? So what's going on here? Google's got my back on this one. So I'm driving along, I'm on the interstate, traffic is pretty bad. So what does Google do? There's no obvious alternate route to take, another highway or interstate or what have you. So it recommended the all get off at the exit and hop right back on trick, saying that it would save me time. It makes you that guy, but it is actually helpful if I'm really in a hurry, right, and I want to get somewhere where I'm going. So just kind of three real quick examples from the same domain, one that was explicitly not helpful, one that was possibly helpful or possibly seen as an annoyance. Why would you want to tell me that I could do something as good as I'm doing it now, but I'd have to change? And then one that actually would be useful to me. So when you're offering documentation to your users, is it even helpful or not? Are you just noise? Are you actually hindering them, or actually are you providing something useful? So let's stay in the mobile realm for one more. I don't know how many people look at these. I do. I always like to know what's going on. But these, if you have an iPhone, these are the app updates on my Android phone. So, excuse me. Sometime back in April of 2018, so I've had these screenshots for a little while, Google changed something about the way that app updates were presented to the end user. So if you don't have them on auto-update, you can go and see the list, and you no longer had to click into them to read the release notes. They were kind of surfaced here, kind of at this top layer. So the thing that happened was right when this change was made, a lot of apps looked like this. Information not provided by a developer. Okay, I get it. This change was just made. This is kind of completely new. But this was a change that was made by Google. And these are all apps developed by Google. Higher? Is that okay? Try that? Okay, sorry. Now, obviously, there are different teams involved. But these are all first-party apps. So the interesting thing here was Google had an idea about how to surface documentation for its end users, right? But it couldn't communicate that inside its own company to actually deliver on that idea. So you can have the best idea in the world, but ultimately, if your end users see some whiz-bang way to deliver documentation and it's all blank or it's all TBD or it's that old moving image, I don't want to offend anyone, GIF or GIF, of the worker with the shovel and the yellow sign, will they even come back when it's available? So is it better to get them the documentation or have it look good? Both are good, but you need to be on the same page with yourself, right? And this was an example where, in my estimation, Google failed on that one. So taking it one step further, now, I don't know if this was a couple weeks or months later or what have you, now there is information there, but look at these. These are useless. I guess it's better than saying nothing. They're at least giving lip service to saying that they've done something positive. They're not just leaving you wondering, well, maybe they put malware in there, I don't know. But ultimately, they all just kind of say variations on the same thing, right? Hey, we made it better. Get the new update. And it's always some spin on both bug fixes and performance improvements or stability improvements or what have you. Now, the issue that I have here, too, is, for software developers, okay, let's think about it. If you're pushing out one of these every week, did you really do bug fixes and performance improvements in every single release? Because they always say the same thing. And in fact, you see for Google Voice, it says, here's what we did, and by the way, the last time, we also did that too. It seems a little disingenuous to me, and it kind of makes me not trust them because they just always say the same thing, like, I'm assuming, they just don't get updated. The apps do, but the release notes don't. So that documentation is basically just a waste of everyone's time. Okay, moving out of the mobile space. Anyone here an OSU grad? Okay, a couple. What's this called? This is the Oval, right? This is on the OSU campus. This is a structure called the Oval. There's some buildings around it. There's kind of a lot of walking activity around there. Okay, except here's the issue. This is not actually the Oval. This is the Oval. So what happened, there's a quote that I want to read about this. I don't know who this guy is, but this guy Bradford was involved. Bradford's plan led to the construction of some of the walks in the Oval, and they're denoted there on the top, but lack of money precluded prompt execution of his whole plan. Over the ensuing years, students made paths at places of convenience without regard to any preconceived plan. In time, these paths became hard-surfaced walks. And what resulted was what you see on the bottom. So the point here is it's very popular these days, right, to have users write your documentation for you, right? You put out some wiki or you have a forum and the users can interact with each other and now they're writing the documentation for your product, right? It saves you time, it saves you money. You don't have to spend time on it, and if there's a problem, you just point them to some other, community moderator, that for some reason spends all their free time documenting your product. Here's the problem, though. You end up with this. You had a great plan, and that's the documentation you would have wrote if you did it, but ultimately what happened is you let your users run amok, and they said, hey, we found a workaround for this or that. Or maybe they develop some sort of process or flow that's in fact based on a bug or a defect. And when you get around to fixing that bug or defect, now it breaks the flow that a lot of people have popularized online. So when you let your users write your documentation for you, you're basically handing over the keys to the car and letting them run amok, and they might do something that you don't want to do. So one more note on the oval. Now, I didn't go to OSU, but from what I've read and what I've been told, this line straight down the middle, this is called the long walk. It's straight through the center of the oval. Now, apparently, as I'm told, there's a group of people who are not allowed to use the long walk, which is, namely, freshmen. Freshmen are required to go around. But the issue there is, although it's probably done for this reason, there's no documentation on that, right? It's all tribal knowledge. So when you run into the situation where you use this oval the wrong way, if you're a freshman and you take the long walk, you're going to find out that you're not allowed to use it, but you're going to find out in the moment that you're picked up and thrown into the lake, which is probably not the best way to learn that you've done something that you're not supposed to do. If there was some sort of signage or documentation or an email sent out to all the underclassmen, hey, freshmen, don't use the long walk, we throw you in the lake. Of course, it's much less fun, although I'm sure it doesn't happen anymore. There's been issues with throwing people in the lake, but if you're not exposing the right information to your end users about particular hazards that you know about and you're not helping them, maybe they're just going to avoid the oval entirely, and the oval being your product. Probably not what you want them to do if they learn things the hard way. Okay, moving on. How about this? How does this kind of signage here, let me move that over and show you another one, and this kind of signage, okay, how do these compare and contrast with this kind of signage? They're all street signs, road signs, information for people who are using the roadways, but it's from a very different context, right? In the first two examples, these are things that people who are unfamiliar with the area are probably interested in, where you could find restaurants or maybe a bathroom, where you can find an airport, where the major roads are, how to get to the closest major cities. Whereas these, also information that you'd find presented on roadways, but it's a very different context. These are probably more for people who do know the area. So you've lived there for a long time, but your kid got a new piano teacher, and your piano teacher lives off State Line on 45th Street. You've never been to that house before, but you know, well, I'll just travel down State Line. I know this sign will tell me where 45th Street is, and then you can go and find the house. It's the blue one on the left, right? So the context of the information is important. If you got to that intersection and found only signs like these, it wouldn't help you get where you were going. But if you're traveling through and you only see this and you don't know where the restaurant is, you also won't be able to get where you're going. So there's kind of two kinds of documentation. You might need some for internal users or for external users. And it matters what you present to which, because they're probably interested in different information. How about these kind of street signs? So this one's from New York City, and here's one from Los Angeles. I lived outside New York City for a while, and I can tell you that this kind of documentation, you might think that it exists for the people who want to park their cars. You're wrong. That is not who this documentation exists for. This documentation exists for the people who are writing the tickets. And they will write the tickets. And this documentation exists for the people who operate the towing businesses. And they will tow your car. So, is your documentation too confusing? Is it too obtuse? Are you presenting it in the wrong way? Could this be better visualized as some kind of a flow chart so you can find your way to what you need? I mean, there's all kinds of valuable information here, but if it's Tuesday at 8 a.m., can you park there? If you have a particular permit for a particular zone, can you park there? And there are exceptions upon exceptions. You know, you're not allowed to park there at a certain time unless it's a certain day, unless it's a certain season where they're doing street cleaning, and so on and so forth. Is it during school hours? Well, is school out of session or not? All of those things come into play, and these are really hard to use. And in fact, if you look closely enough, in certain cases, the signs are overlapping each other and covering up information, and it's just a mess. So like you've presented basically all the documentation that's relevant, but in such a way that no one can really use it, and the users are going to become frustrated with trying to interact with your product. Okay, how about this one? How long do you think it would take you to open that lock? If you really had to get into that house, I mean, I think the biggest question in my mind is, you know, are there 4 punches or 5, you know, or something like that? But I'm pretty sure that you could iterate through those possibilities. You've been given a fair amount of information on how to operate this. The problem is, this is a security issue, right? So have you exposed information to your users that they shouldn't have? Have you made certain things too clear that actually should be a secret or should be locked down or maybe only given to internal users? You know, the real world example there is very dependent on your product and the purpose of what you're doing. But it's interesting to think about, you know, if you were walking down the house and your proclivity was to, you know, break into houses, this would be a good one to choose because it seems like it sticks out in terms of allowing unwanted users to operate with this product in a way that's unintended. So something to watch out for. All right, sticking with houses. This is my fuse box in the basement of my house. I'll zoom in a little bit. So I went to replace my dishwasher a couple years ago now, and the point of the fuse box is everything in your house that runs on electricity, whether it's a light switch or an outlet or whatever, ultimately goes through one of these fuses. These fuses can be turned off individually so that you can do electric work on a particular area without having to shut off electricity to the whole house. So they're in every house, and they're labeled, but the problem is all of the labels are wrong. So it's indicated what's going on, but the problem is my house was built in 1963. And in that time, between then and now, the house has been updated in various ways. It's a different house now than it was then. And this fuse box has evolved with the house, right? So when I went to change dishwashers, I kind of learned the hard way that these were labeled incorrectly. And ultimately, what I basically had to do after a couple trials and errors is just give up and shut them all off, because it wasn't working for me, right? I was trying to interact with this documentation that was presenting itself as current and complete and final and authoritative, but the documentation did not evolve with the product, so to speak. So the point here is every time that a change was made to the house, this documentation should have been updated in the moment, right? That's the easiest time to do it. It's really hard to come back after the fact and say like, okay, hey, we've got some time to breathe, we can catch up now. What changes did we make? At that point, you might have forgot, because by the way, you didn't document them. Or maybe they were written down on a notepad that got cleaned up or thrown away or used for other notes. And really the only way to fix this is to go outlet by outlet, light switch by light switch through the entire house, fuse by fuse, and spend a lot of time on it. I could do that, but I know that I'm still going to get it wrong because that's not the right way to do it. I could make this much better, but my solution is actually just to move, and I'm going to make this someone else's problem. And that's what happens to a lot of teams too, right? Listen, I'm a very pragmatic guy. I get it. I've made that decision sometimes too, and sometimes it's the right decision. You say, we're going to have to come back to this. The code, the product is the more important thing, especially if it's internal documentation. But you have to go into that understanding the trade-off, right? If you leave it for now, it's going to take more time to do later, and it's probably going to be less correct. So it's definitely a trade-off there. Okay, this is one of my favorite ones because I'm a little bit of a map geek. It's also a little bit harder to explain. So this pinpoint here, this is Kaskaskia, Illinois. Anyone familiar? No, okay. So here's what's the deal with Kaskaskia, Illinois. It's basically not a place anymore. It's kind of a relic. So it used to be the capital of the Illinois Territory for about 9 years. And then when Illinois became a state, it was the capital of the state of Illinois for a little bit less than a year. So it's of historical interest, but it's also of geographical interest because the interesting thing is, you see this river here? It used to go around the city of Kaskaskia. And you can kind of see a faint outline. There is still a waterway there, but the river changed course for the bulk of the flow, right? And so now, interestingly, you can't get to Kaskaskia, Illinois by land from any other point of Illinois. It's now on the other side of the river, and the only way to get to it is from the neighboring state. So the moral of the story here is don't base your documentation on rivers. So what happens, again, when your product evolves and changes, but your documentation remains static? It's based on something that was malleable and flexible, and you didn't keep up with change. Let's see. Here's another river, and the state border was based just on the course of the river. And I've outlined the state border here somewhat crudely in red. And you can see the river changed course. So this state border is now extremely awkward. And I could fill an entire presentation with how rivers have mucked things up in this way. I'll keep it to just these two. But you can see here, like the documentation for this, it's entirely unwieldy. It doesn't make sense anymore. And it's kind of just based on tradition and historical reasons and things like that, which don't make sense anymore. And then that becomes something that you have to explain to your users. So like, what are the fixed points that you're referencing? What are the fixed points that you're anchoring your documentation to that aren't future-proof? You don't really want to end up in this situation. There's going to be some sort of sub-segment of users like myself who find this very interesting, and no one else is going to care because they just want to use your product, right? Okay, so apologies to people whose proclivities lead you another way. I happen to be a Boston Red Sox fan. And in 2018, they won the World Series. So this is the text from a Wikipedia article about that, taken sometime last year. And I kind of wanted to focus on this one sentence in the middle. It's pretty simple, just reads, the Red Sox beat the Dodgers in, what's it say, 5 games to win their 4th World Series title. And it was actually their 5th. It was their 4th in 15 years, going back to 2004. Very simple, very succinct. It tells you what happened, right? Is this enough information? In a lot of cases, yes. Like this is the answer you would get from your digital assistant if you asked, how many World Series titles have the Red Sox won? Or when did they win their last World Series title? Or something like that. You're just looking for a fact. But the issue here is there's a lot of people who are interested in a much deeper amount of information that's hidden behind this. Okay, for instance, this was, this game 3 of the series was 18 innings long. For those of you who don't know baseball, a baseball game is 9 innings long by regulation, but if you're tied at the end of the game, you just keep going another inning until someone finally has the lead at the end of that inning. So this game went twice as long as a standard regulation game in terms of innings. And that's an interesting anecdote that people who follow baseball or people who follow those 2 particular teams, it's of interest to them. And it's hidden behind the simple fact that the Red Sox won that World Series. But even this additional information leads to more unanswered questions. For instance, this column here shows the errors that were committed. There's a person at every baseball game, their job is to decide if the players commit an error. Some of them are obvious, you missed a catch. Some of them are less obvious. Maybe you threw to the wrong base or something like that. But each team here committed one error, according to the bookkeeper. That's interesting information as well, but it leads to yet more questions. Did either of those errors extend the game, for instance? Could one or the other team have prevented a run by not committing that error? Would it have affected the outcome? And from this information alone, we don't know. So you probably have two salty old guys in a bar somewhere saying like, if so-and-so hadn't done this or that, we would have had that game. But everyone reading the Wikipedia article might not have that information. They might be interested in it, but it might not be available. Okay, last one of these. Here's another game. This is game 4 from the same series. And this was a pivotal game in the series because after this game, if the Dodgers won, the series would have been tied 2-2. If the Red Sox won, they would have had a 3-1 lead in the series, which is pretty big. It's quite significant. Now, these particular innings here are of great interest to Red Sox fans because at this point in the game, you can see at the end of the 6th inning, the Dodgers, Los Angeles Dodgers, had a 4-run lead. And the Red Sox had not scored all game. Their offense was just not clicking. Now, Wikipedia does have a sentence about this, and it says, at that point, before the start of the 7th inning, Red Sox ace Chris Sale made an angry speech that fired up his teammates in the dugout. And then they went on to score 9 runs over the final 3 innings, and they won the game. And I just love that little anecdote because I like to imagine all these millionaires sitting in a dugout yelling at each other and deciding to go out and win the game. And that's a really crucial moment. It turned the tide of the game. But again, from the simple sentence saying that the Red Sox won the series, that kind of interesting information is just left completely unavailable, unexposed to your end users. So are you giving your end users the depth of information that they want? Are you leaving them to find it out themselves? Are they going to make sidewalks on the oval? Or are you providing it to them? Are you engaging your users in the way that they want to be engaged? Some people probably want the one sentence. Some people probably want more detail. It can be tough to manage, but if you have users that tend towards one or the other and you can figure that out, are you meeting their needs? Okay, so, and I'm from Columbus, so kind of sticking with that. Does anyone know what this building is called? This is the Shoe, right? Except it's not. This is Ohio Stadium. Everybody calls it the Shoe. Why? It's shaped like a horseshoe. That's the colloquial name for it. But the name of this building is Ohio Stadium. Really, nobody calls it that. Google Maps does. So how are you engaging with your users in this sense? Do they have the same terminology that you do? Are you sharing that? Do you have the same terminology as your competitors? Are your competitors' terminologies overrunning yours? Are you speaking the same language? Are you using technical terms that your users don't understand? Are you using colloquial terms that your technical users don't understand? Are you literally speaking a different human language than your end users? And how can you bridge that gap? Everyone knows this as the Shoe, not even the horseshoe, as the Shoe, but it's really called Ohio Stadium. So are you clicking with your end users? Or are they confused about what you're talking about, even though they're using your product? Okay. This one is a little bit tough, but I wanted to try it. Is anyone familiar with the story that I want to talk about here? So it's kind of fun and kind of horrible. So this is a book, The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. It's a fairly old book at this point. Old enough, in fact, that in the early 1900s, I didn't write down a date here, it might be on my next slide, there was a radio adaptation of the story in this book. Radio was the medium of the time. So people would sit around and they'd tune into their radios instead of television or what have you. So in 1938, sorry. So at that time, a lot of people are listening to the radios, but they might have come in midway through this radio adaptation of a story about Martians invading Earth. And a lot of people thought that it was a radio broadcast from the news about Martians invading the Earth, which, if that's happening, things are really going wrong, things are very scary, and a lot of people are going to act in certain ways that they wouldn't if they knew that it was supposed to be entertainment. So here's a news article from the time. If you can't read it, it is a little difficult. The headline in the middle says, "Radio listeners in panic, taking war drama as fact. Many flee homes to escape gas raid from Mars. Phone calls swamp police at broadcast of Wells fantasy." It's absolutely incredible. So the question that I have to ask about this is, who has the authority to document, or what makes documentation authoritative? Because people thought that this was authoritative documentation about something that was happening to Earth, to humanity right now. But it wasn't. It was not intended to be farcical. It was intended to be entertainment, but people took it as documentation and as fact. That's a hard problem to solve because you don't want to interrupt your entertainment every 5 to 10 minutes and say, hey, by the way, we're just having a good laugh. Stay tuned, for the next 5 minutes of Martians invading Earth drama. But are your end users taking your jokes seriously? Are you too easygoing and free about it? Or do you have the other problem? Are you being too formal and stuffy and your users want to be more casual and easy breezy? It can be hard to get that, to land at the right point on that scale. But if you don't do it right, it can go very, very wrong. I mean, there were riots and all kinds of calamities that happened out of this that were completely avoidable. I guess there are also allegories there for tech demos as well. Okay, how about this? Using an elevator. Most of these buttons do what they say. One of them does not. That door close button, it does not work. It lights up, just like all the other ones, but elevator manufacturers basically don't even wire it to anything. It's a placebo. It's there to make you feel better. It doesn't actually make the door close. If you've ever been in an elevator and in a hurry and pressed the door close button, you know what I mean. The door open button works, but the door close button really doesn't affect the outcome of the operation of that elevator. So are you actually exposing something to your end users that's an outright lie? If you are, you should have a really good reason for doing that. And if you don't, you probably shouldn't. Is it just to make them feel better about something? Is it to mask the fact that a feature is not ready or something of that nature? If there's something in your documentation that you're exposing that isn't true or is a lie, ultimately it's going to end up frustrating your end users. Okay, sticking with elevators, here's one that I found. I don't know if you can see it, especially in the back. There's Braille on these buttons, which you would think maybe would help you figure out what these two sets of things do that look very similar, but the Braille is actually the same for both sets. So even if you can read Braille, you're not going to get much help. I have no idea in the elevator that I was in what the difference is between the ones that don't have the bar down the middle and the ones that do have the bar down the middle. It wasn't one of those elevators with the front and the back. It was very confusing. I probably could have stayed in that elevator and tried to do some trial and error, but ultimately, I have no idea what these buttons do. I got where I needed to go, but there was no documentation there that helped me. Even maybe like a simple word or two would have helped and gotten me over the hump, but the word that was provided in Braille is actually the same for both. I don't read Braille, but I can tell that the dots are the same. So the documentation and the user interface that was exposed here really just left me wildly confused. Are we doing that to our end users? Are we putting too many features out there and treating them as if they're the same thing? Are we allowing our users to understand the difference between the different features that we have, the different toggles that we're exposing? Or are we leaving them to figure out themselves? This one I love because I've taken a number of flights. I don't know, but I'm sure that this sleeping mask was for some kind of long-haul flight. So the interesting thing here is, if you can't read it, the top mask, so the mask has two sides, and the top mask says, "Wake me up for meal" on it. And if you flip it the other way, it says, "Do not disturb." So this actually allows the impossible. This allows a sleeping person to communicate with a flight attendant, right? That's not something that's possible. You can't both be asleep and communicating unless you leave some kind of note, or who has notes on an airplane? You have a mask that allows you to say, listen, sleep is more important than food, or potentially food is more important than sleep. So when they come by, you're asleep, but they can look at your mask and they can say, this person wants to be woken up, they want a hot meal. This person does not want to be woken up, they'd like to be rested. So the interesting thing to me about this is this was a problem that was impossible to solve, but someone found a very elegant and simple solution to allow that communication at a critical moment on an airline flight when someone basically has two choices, and it's really a very personal choice about whether you want to eat or sleep. And no one aside from you really knows what that choice is. You have to make it yourself, but if you choose to sleep and you don't want to be waken up, you have a way to indicate that. If you choose to sleep, but you want the meal, you have a way to indicate that. So are there elegant solutions to problems that you've given up on where there actually could be a very simple amount of documentation given to your end users to solve a complicated problem? That's a question that I can't answer for you, but don't give up on the things that are difficult because elegant solutions probably exist. Okay, how about this? I've maybe worked with one or two sets of furniture that had the pieces distributed in this way. Usually you get like all the washers in one bag, all the screws in another bag, all the little wooden dowel pieces in a third bag, and you have to kind of marshal them and keep track of them and keep your kids away from them while you're spending 5 or 8 hours building the piece of furniture, right? This one doesn't do that. And if we flip it over and you look on the back, each of these compartments correlates to a step in the process. So the way that they've documented this is they said, these are the pieces you need to do step 1 in the instructions, not go find 5 of these and 2 of those and 3 of these and hold on to them. They said, open the box that says step 1. It has everything that you need. This also solved a problem that vexed me quite a bit, and it's so obvious in retrospect, right? But no one cared to provide this level of interaction with their users, at that level of quality. They just said, well, listen, all the washers come off the same line. We know we need 16 of them, throw them in a bag. It probably costs a little bit more to do it this way, but it really enhances the experience for your end users. It's like, what are the ways that you could be doing this? Is there something that you've been doing the same way for 5 or 10 or 15 years that you could revisit and tweak and improve the experience for your end users? Okay, I'm also a little bit of an astronomy nerd. Does anyone know what this one is? This is the Andromeda Galaxy. But it's also known by another name, Messier 31. But it's also known by another name, New General Catalog 224. It's also known by another name, UGC 454. It's also known by PGC 2557, and I'm not making any of these up, all of these. That same galaxy is named in all of these different systems, in all of these different ways, and I wish I was making some of these up, but it gets really nerdy and specific, and some of these, I'm sure, have different goals, and like some of them are pretty specific. You know, they have pluses, and like it seems like maybe they're based on some sort of aspect of the Andromeda Galaxy, where it is, what it's made up of, what its size is, or something like that. But some of them are just saying, you know, hey, I'm cataloging objects that I can see in the sky, and this is my list, and your list is different, and I don't like your list, so I'm making my own. So there's a lot of overlap here. So the interesting thing is, how are we exposing the documentation to the users from the perspective of, is there already documentation for our users? Is that documentation correct, or is it not? This is like the old XKCD article where, or the comic where, the two characters are talking to each other. They say, hey, there's 14 competing standards. Let's make one that's definitive. And in the next box, now there are 15 competing standards. So you really have to be careful with this. From a defensive standpoint, if the documentation that's out there, maybe you let your users create it and they run amok, and so you need to get it back to its truth, to its core. Or maybe there's already a ton of documentation out there and it's actually fairly definitive and authoritative, and you should join with that instead of introducing your own or a competing documentation. Because this is just crazy. Some of these are for specific purpose, but there's a lot of overlap there. Okay, back to cinema. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. So if you've seen The Princess Bride, the movie, you know that this character basically says that to just about everybody that he meets. But there's a lot we can learn from it. It's a polite greeting. It gives you his name, a relevant personal link, and he's trying to manage expectations. It's a documentation about the encounter that you're about to have with Inigo Montoya. So he set this out there. He wants everyone to know. It's very short, succinct, to the point. I have to imagine he's probably worked on that over the years. He's really whittled it down to just the basics. This is an interaction that he's had countless numbers of times, and he's really distilled it to the essence. So are you being more long-winded in your documentation than you need to be? Are you going around in circles? Are you as straightforward as you can be? And if not, where can it be improved? It takes him 4 sentences. We'll count hello as its own sentence. 4 sentences for him to tell you actually quite a lot of information about who he is, who he thinks you are, and what he plans to do in that interaction. Okay, as promised, Legos. It's just so simple and effective. One of the brilliant things about Lego instructions is you can print this and ship it around the world. It doesn't matter what language the user is speaking or knows. It doesn't matter if they've actually, quite frankly, ever seen Legos before. It really gets right to the heart of what Legos are, what you can do with them, and how to do something interesting with them. It gives you a great example of how to build this little truck in 5 simple steps. This one is slightly more complicated because it does involve flipping the pieces over. In the more modern instructions, they kind of have a symbol that kind of indicates flipping things over at the certain times. So they've actually still managed to iterate and improve on their documentation as they've learned things over the years. But images can be so helpful in getting the point across. They can be used incorrectly and they can take up a lot of space. It can be hard to get just the right screenshot of a particular user interaction that you're going for. But images can be so valuable. It's cliche, how they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But they really can help hammer the point across in certain ways that text just can't. So are you using images effectively? Are you overusing images? Are you using them for the right way? But the most important thing is, have you considered images? Because they can really distill things down to a critical point that can actually be very hard to convey, even if you use a lot of words. Okay, I like this one too. Anyone know what these are? Yeah, so there's 2 spacecraft that were built by NASA, the Voyager spacecraft. And the idea behind the Voyager spacecraft was we're going to send them out, and we don't necessarily know exactly where they're going to go. They're going to run out of fuel. But as of, I think, a year or 2 ago, they've actually left our solar system, both of them, and they're going in different directions. And the hope is that some sort of intelligent extraterrestrial life will find them and learn something about us, humanity. So whatever your thoughts or beliefs are about extraterrestrial life, the interesting thing to me is this was an attempt to communicate not only with some sort of individual that doesn't speak the same language, but is not even human. And how are we going to find common ground, and how are we going to express ideas and get some information across? So it was put on gold records that on one side had images and music, and then on the other side had some sort of documentation about how to play the thing, and then also some documentation about where Earth is, which is a little bit scary if intelligent extraterrestrials have a map to us, but I guess we decided that was worth taking the chance. So let me kind of give you another look at this. So this is all of the same information, but with some text for humans to explain what we did, and I'll zoom in a little bit. So for instance, in the top left corner there, this is information about how to play the record. And they did include a needle in there. And it's a little bit laughable, but these were sent out, I think, in the 1970s, late 1970s. So this was the technology we had at the time. We're sending spaceships into outer space, but we were still using records to play music. So this was the best way that we thought we had to try to put data on some sort of medium that we could send out into space and have someone else, some other individual out there, possibly find it and play it. So they gave them instructions about how to play the record, and there's the English explanation. And I'll be honest with you, if I was given that explanation, I don't think I could do it, but maybe the aliens have smarter scientists than me. So how are you communicating with people who are different than you? Maybe they speak the same language, maybe they don't, maybe they're just different in certain ways, but are you connecting with your end users? How different than the people who develop your products are they? And have you considered that? Is there a way to bridge the language gap and meet them? Maybe you need to hire some sort of community manager that can talk to the technical team and then talk to the end users or something like that. But are you guys speaking the same language? Are you speaking the same concepts? Do they understand where you're coming from? More importantly, do you understand where they're coming from? Or is there a barrier that's going to keep them from using your product to its fullest? Okay, this is kind of interesting and also a little bit creepy. These are called the Georgia Guidestones. It's a placement, a structure of these pretty tall stones that each have 10 guidelines carved into them in 8 different languages. They were placed by persons unknown in Elbert County, Georgia, kind of in the middle of nowhere, which is probably why the people who did it are unknown. They just kind of ended up there. And this was some group of people, their attempt to give modern society guidelines on how to live and operate and conduct a civilization. So there's 10 guidelines inscribed in 8 languages on these stones. But however you take the intent of this and whether or not you agree with the guidelines, I find some very interesting things about this. Namely, so here's one of them. It says, let these be guidestones to an age of reason. But there's a couple issues, okay? So for instance, in one particular spot, there's a stone that it appears to be unfinished. So it's saying that there's a time capsule below here, and it looks like there's a space where there's supposed to be a date of when it was placed and a date of when this group of people thought that someone who found this should dig it up. Those dates are missing. Those people will probably never come back and fill those dates in because they want to be unknown. So now we're left with a question. A, was it placed at all, or did they somehow forget? Did they blow their master plan and forget to place the time capsule? And B, assuming that it is there, when did they want someone else to dig it up? So they had this great grand plan, but they missed some of these minor details. We don't know who these people are, so we can't ask them. And due to the fact that they want to remain anonymous, they will probably never come back and fix this mistake. So is your documentation finished? Did you leave it in a state that's acceptable to your end users? Will they be able to get the information that they need to about it? Almost all documentation that's out there really could be improved in some way, but what are the major ways? What are the biggest ways where your documentation is lacking? We don't know if that time capsule is there or if we're supposed to dig it up and figure something out. And for that reason, no one will probably ever dig there for fear of mucking with this, situation without understanding what's going on. It's very mysterious and it's kind of scary. And for that reason, that interaction is probably just never going to happen. Okay, so this is the one that kind of led me to develop this whole talk. So there's a document out there. You can find it at that link. And I will get all these slides online as well, so you don't have to copy that down. The document is called The Expert Judgment on Markers to Deter Inadvertent Human Intrusion into the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. So we as a society, as a civilization, we're starting to get into nuclear energy and using those sorts of science and physics for the purposes of our civilization. The problem is it generates waste that we've found out is very dangerous, basically, to life, whether it's human, plant, animal, or otherwise. So we know this, and we know that we need to do something with that nuclear waste. So the government got a group of experts together, and they said, figure out how to take care of that waste. Now, one of the problems is that waste lasts for a long time. We can bury it, but if we bury it, where should we do it? Once we figure that out, we need to know that that place will be protected on the order of thousands of years. So what these experts, this group of experts, came together to do was to say, okay, let's say it's going to be there for 10,000 years. How do we communicate with the people who are living or find that 10,000 years from now that something very bad is here? Now, if they have the same level of science advancement that our current culture does, they'll probably have equipment to detect that. But what if they don't? What if society collapses or we all nuke ourselves and later people are coming back and finding this? How do we communicate with those people? Maybe they'll still be speaking English. Maybe they won't. Maybe the English language will have evolved by then. So how do we communicate with them? We expect them to be human, but we don't know who they are or what their civilization will look like. So, a couple screen grabs from the document. One of the interesting things here is the low-hanging fruit, right? Let's find something that we can say in English, because that's very easy to do. So like the last paragraph down at the bottom, it says, do not destroy this marker. This marking system has been designed to last 10,000 years. If the marker is difficult to read, add new markers in longer lasting materials in languages that you speak. And for more information, go to another building, another structure that's further along. So maybe there's some sort of archaeological, even if they don't speak English, someone who's studied at that time the ancient language of English and can say like, wow, this is really important. They've given us a warning and we can translate it and now we can put it in our modern language. But what if even that level is not possible? So they came up with some ideas. One of them was what they called the spike field. So they said, well, we can try to make this area look bad or uninhabitable or menacing in some sort of way, difficult land, something that we don't want people to come into. Another idea was, this one's called the spike field, whatever the last one was called, thorns, I think. So here's another one. And a third idea that they came up with, menacing earthworks. So, but one of the things that this reminds me of is bad modern art, right? And what do we do in our modern civilization when we find a new cave with cave paintings or a new buried city? We send people there to study it, right? We go there on purpose. We don't send a ton of people, but we go there to try to figure things out. So from my point of view, this isn't going to scare people away as much as people are going to come and say, let's study the ancient society that left these things here. Let's send a team of 100 scientists and archaeologists to figure this out. And guess what? They're probably all going to get nuclear poisoning. Another thing that they did is they said, okay, to a certain degree, this has been done before. So they studied the pyramids because the pyramids were a way for the ancient Egyptians to basically document certain things about their culture, to document certain things about certain people who were buried there, their pharaohs, and keep that information contained and readable for a very long period of time, right? On the order of several thousand years. And here's a rather crude drawing from the document. I love the idea that scientists put this together, because my kids probably could have done this, where they said, okay, here's an example of durable message material. That's maybe just some block of stone, or maybe it's like the actual coffin or something that a pharaoh was buried in, and it's inside the pyramid. The pyramid, as a structure, kept it safe, right? The pyramids definitely suffered a certain amount of decay, but what was contained inside of them was basically preserved, and so they said, okay, that's an example of durable message transmittal, something that we can look back on and learn from. So are you studying what your competitors are doing? Do you have competitors with similar products? Are you studying the way that they're conveying their messages to their end users? Are there things that you can learn from them? Are you studying other current products that maybe aren't competitors to you but are well documented and seeing what you can learn from them? Are you hiring experts to tell you how to interact with your end users and help you bridge that gap? One other thing that they came up with was, okay, presuming that they're humans, maybe we can try to find some faces to convey emotions about what being around this place might do to you. I kind of just find these scary, and to be honest, very few of these actually look human to me. It's kind of weird, so I personally debate the usefulness of these, but if this was one of their ideas, similar to the menacing earthworks and the spike field, would there be unintended consequences of presenting documentation like this? Is it going to have the effect that you want? Have you tested it? Have you done A/B testing, focus group testing? Have you asked some of your expert or common users how they feel about your documentation? And then one idea they had was, okay, it's kind of vague and hard to explain if they don't have the science that there's invisible energy that's bad for you here, but maybe we can relate it to something else, like falling off a cliff. So it's pretty easy to understand that if you're standing on the edge of a cliff and you fall off, you're going to suffer some sort of physical harm. And so the idea here was they wanted to relate this symbol of the circle with the slash through it as something that you should not do. If A, then B, therefore, when I present you this C, understand I'm telling you don't stand on the edge of a cliff. You're suffering danger. So then can we relay or convey that information into another situation, i.e., don't be here? Can we bridge the gap that way? And I think this is the last example. And I kind of don't like this one either. But what they were trying to show here is you can see the tree, so like there's a passage of time. But the way that I take this is, so like there's the symbol there for a nuclear radiation, radioactive symbol. And this person is finding it and saying like, that looks cool. I like that. I'm going to start wearing that on my clothes. I'm going to tell my friends. We're going to start a cult with this cool symbol as something that drives us. And we're going to share that. And then, by the way, people are going to take pilgrimages here, which is the exact opposite intent of what you wanted, right? So there's kind of two different ways to read this. One in which if you stay here, the symbol on something bad is going to become attached to you, and then by the time the tree grows, you're going to get sick. That's why he can't stand up. But to me, it's weak in that sense because the tree would also be affected and probably not grow. So like the meaning that I ascribed to it was deciding that you like it, and then you want to make it part of your lifestyle, and then inviting other people to this place to party. So it's going to have the opposite effect of what you want it to, potentially. So this is, I think, a counterexample to the images, where if you use an image and it's taken the wrong way, potentially without text to help explain and drive the point home, it might not be what you want. It might have the opposite effect on your intended end users. Okay, so, and I'm running close on time here, I think, or maybe I've gone a little bit over. I will have all these slides up on my GitHub, but I've given this talk before, so a very similar slide deck is already in my GitHub at that URL. And I do want to say it's helpful to the conference and to me if you fill out the session survey, whether you liked it or you didn't. Leave me some feedback, rate it. Ironically, did you think I documented the talk well in my abstract, and things like that. And if you want to talk afterwards, I'd be happy to, but I hope you guys have a good time. I hope that it was kind of light and humorous, but also potentially thought-provoking. Thanks for coming.